We often take calendars for granted. But what if the original calendar described in the Quran was different from the one used today? That's what we're digging into here, an investigation, right from the text itself. And what we find might just change how you see things.
All right, so let's start with the big, glaring question. It's the puzzle that kicks this whole thing off. The month of Ramadan. Its name literally means scorching heat. But you know this, sometimes it lands smack in the middle of winter. How does that even work? It's a huge contradiction, right? How can a month named for summer end up in winter? That's our first clue.
Okay, so to start unraveling this mystery, the source material we're looking at points to clue number one. It's what I'd call the sun and moon clause, a verse that talks about how we're supposed to keep time.
And here it is, chapter 10, verse 5. It says, God made the sun this brilliant radiance and the moon a light and set it up in phases. But the really important part, the part you've got to focus on, is why. It says it was done so that you may know the number of years and the reckoning.
Did you catch that? The key word is and. It doesn't say, hey, use the moon for months and the sun for something else. Nope. It connects both the sun and the moon to the same job, figuring out the number of years and the reckoning. This idea of a shared job, that's the whole foundation of this argument.
And this is where it gets really practical. I mean, look at the numbers. A year based only on the moon is about 354 days. So every year, it falls behind the seasons by about 11 days. It just drifts. A solar year, though, the one our seasons follow, is about 365 days. It's stable. So if the Quran says to use both to count the years, you have to ask, how can you properly count seasonal years if your calendar is constantly drifting away from?
All right, that brings us to clue number two, and this one is hiding in plain sight. It's right there in the names of the months, especially the most famous one of all. Yeah, Ramadan. The name itself comes from an Arabic root, RMD, and that root is all about one thing: intense, scorching heat. We're talking burning, searing heat. So it's not just a poetic name, it's a literal description of a time of year.
So we're back to that big question again, aren't we? Why on earth would you have a system where a month named scorching heat ends up in the freezing cold? It just doesn't make logical sense. According to the source we're examining, the only way it does make sense is if the month names were originally meant to stay locked into their seasons.
Okay, now for clue number three, and this one's the big one. It's a bit more complex because it centers on a really controversial verse. It's the verse that's often pointed to as the reason for the purely lunar calendar, because it condemns a practice called nasi. So here's the verse 937. It says that this nasi is basically a way for people to mess with the calendar. They make a sacred month not sacred one year, and then make it sacred the next, just to get the number of sacred months to line up with what God ordained. They're playing games with it to suit themselves. But the huge question is, what is this nasi they're talking about?
And this, right here, is the absolute core of the whole argument. Is this verse telling people to stop doing the basic math required to keep the calendar in sync with the seasons? Or is it something else? Is it telling them to stop messing with the sanctity of the months? Swapping them around for convenience, like to go to war or make a profit?
Let's make this super clear. You've got two totally different ideas here. The first is what's called intercalation. It's just a mathematical correction. Think of it like a leap year. You add a day every 4 years to keep our calendar on track. Same idea, but adding a month every few years. It's just math. The second idea, the nasi, the source points to, is completely different. It's not about math, it's about manipulation. It's like changing the rules of a game in the middle just because you're losing. So here's the bottom line from the source's perspective. The Quran is condemning the manipulation of sacred time. It's a warning against messing with what's holy. It is not, they argue, a ban on the basic math you need to do to make sure summer months actually happen in the summer. Okay, so we have our clues. Let's start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. When you take all this evidence, the sun and moon verse, the seasonal month names, and this interpretation of nasi, a very specific picture of a calendar starts to form. Let's build it step by step. First, you use the moon for what it's good at, marking the months. Easy enough. Second, you track the full year by the sun, by the seasons, just like that verse told us to. Third, you stick to 12 months as your standard. But, and this is the key, fourth, every so often you make a little adjustment to make sure everything stays lined up, to keep your scorching hot month from wandering into a snowstorm. And what do you call a system that does all that? A system that uses lunar months but is anchored to the solar year? Well, there's a name for it. It's a lunisolar calendar. And this isn't some weird, exotic idea. The Jewish calendar, the Chinese calendar, lots of cultures have used this exact type of system for thousands of years.
So this raises a huge, obvious question, right? If all the evidence in the text points to this lunisolar system, then why is a completely different, purely lunar calendar used today? What happened? Where did things change?
Well, the source points to a specific moment in history. The evidence suggests that during the prophet's lifetime, a lunisolar calendar was already the norm in the region. But the shift came later, about 6 years after his death, around 638 CE. The second caliph, Umar, convened a council. They needed to standardize things. And in that meeting, they made a critical decision. They interpreted that first about Nasi as a total ban on any kind of calendar adjustment. And just like that, the official calendar became purely lunar. And the consequences of that single administrative decision were massive and immediate. First, Ramadan, the month of scorching heat, started its long drift through the seasons. Second, the month names lost their literal descriptive meaning and became purely symbolic. And third, ironically, for all the practical stuff like farming, planning, and collecting taxes, they still had to use a separate solar calendar on the side anyway. So this brings us to the final takeaway from our source material. And it's a big one. The argument is that this wasn't just a technical change in calendar math. It was a fundamental shift in philosophy, a shift between two concepts, deen versus religion. Let me break down what they mean by that. Deen is presented as a way of life that's in sync with the natural, observable world, a system that works with reality, with the seasons. It's universal. Religion, on the other hand, is framed as a system that creates specific rituals and markers that make a community distinct and separate from others. So, putting it all together, the source's conclusion is pretty profound. The argument is that the calendar change took a system that was universal and practical, a way of telling time that was grounded in the natural world, and turned it into something different, a unique symbol that served to define a specific religious community.
And that's really the question this whole investigation leaves us with. What do you think a calendar is fundamentally for? Is its main job to keep us in sync with the rhythms of the natural world? Or is its purpose to serve as a unique emblem, something that defines a community and sets it apart? It's a big question to think about.